This is Understanding the Limitations of Gatsby-Source-Drupal. I'm assuming that probably a lot of you guys were at Kyle's talk earlier. Perfect lead-in. Fantastic. So what we're just going to talk about is specifically my experience using Gatsby with Drupal, and look at some of the challenges I ran into and some other related things going on in the community as far as using Gatsby with Drupal. So I am Brian Perry. I'm a senior front-end developer at HS2 Solutions. I live in the Chicago suburbs. I am a lover of all things component-based, which is quite the popular opinion these days. So things like using pattern libraries and design systems with like Pattern Lab, and increasingly building with component-based JavaScript like React. Also love all things Nintendo. So if you want to talk about the cool games you're playing on your Switch, come find me. For me, it's Dead Cells, which is awesome. And I'm on the internet in a variety of places and would love to internet with you. As I mentioned, I work at a company called HS2 Solutions. We've got a couple of offices in the Chicago area. Drupal is one of a handful of things that we do, but work with a great team of Drupal folks, learn a ton from them, and thank them for sending me out here. So, especially since many of you probably got either are already familiar or got an introduction in the earlier session today to Gatsby, I'll just focus on the Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin. So Gatsby has a number of different plugins, do a handful of things, including get data from different data sources. So there is the Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin. And that allows you to, for a Drupal site that has the JSON API module installed, you can load data into Gatsby, use it in your build, also query the data that comes back from your Drupal site, and we'll look at that. It's pretty easy to get up and running, installed, and configured, but in using it, I have run into some challenges. So a lot of what I've kind of learned these things through is through my personal site. So earlier in the year, around January, kind of New Year's resolution time, I wanted to write more on my personal site, and had also been learning about decoupled Drupal and learning some React. So it was a good opportunity. I'd heard about Gatsby, so I wanted to try to set up rebuild my site using Gatsby and also have the data come from Drupal. So that's what I did. This is my first post on the new site. So as I was doing that, and also since then, I've kind of been keeping an eye on the community and trying to get a feel for who is using Gatsby and Drupal together. So within the community, there's been a good handful of tutorials. I think it's all the rage to write about Gatsby and Drupal these days, but I find that those tutorials don't go very deep. They kind of get to the point where you've got 5 nodes listed on a page and then off into the world you go. There are a couple of reference implementations. The Gatsby one is great. It uses the umami data. There's also a Contenta reference implementation as well. I have noticed for folks in the Drupal community that I've seen using Gatsby, either digging around a little bit or asking, that many are using markdown as a data source rather than actually using Drupal. So that got me scratching my head a little bit. And just in general, anecdotally, heard a lot of talk about people using Gatsby with Drupal together, but not a ton of concrete examples. Although yesterday and today have been able to fill in a few of those. Matt this morning showed a prototype where he's using Drupal Commerce along with Gatsby. In one of the talks yesterday, I think on progressively decoupled use cases, there's this outrider.org site, which is a beautiful looking Gatsby site. It isn't using the Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin. And then the decoupled dev days site itself is also a Gatsby site. And what they did there, which I think is an interesting approach, is they started out with just Gatsby, and then as their content needs dictated it, they layered in data from Drupal, specifically for their session content. And then also did some informal polling on the internet as well. The Gatsby account was nice enough to retweet my who's using Gatsby and Drupal comment. Some interesting responses here, sticking with markdown and netlify, citing like updates and management of Drupal, but interesting specifically calling out cases where there's lots of users or lots of volume as a case where Drupal could be advantageous and might make sense. Next one with citing WordPress and Contentful with Gatsby, but specifically talking about CMS config there. That was one I replied to and said, I think we've actually made some advancements there. The process is easier with some of the API-first distributions like Contenta. Encourage them to take a look at that. And then the third one is kind of an interesting, recent kind of sideways development. The Tome project. Who's familiar with Tome? I also always want to say Tomei, like Marissa Tomei, but I'm pretty sure that's not how you're supposed to say it. So that's a Drupal project that is a Drupal-based static site generator. So there are also some examples of that working with Gatsby. And that's a situation where it's actually kind of like a weird middle ground where Tome will generate static exports of all your content, JSON files, and then Gatsby would look at those exported files through its file system plugin. So it's kind of like, it's Drupal data, but it's not actually talking to Drupal. So I thought that was interesting too. So in general, I'm wondering why there aren't more concrete examples, aren't more usage in the community. Some theories is that sometimes people are going to start with tutorials that use Markdown. It's a simple, easy way to get up and running with a data source, and maybe face some resistance trying to then move over to get data from Drupal. Or maybe they just, in that case, realize that Markdown is good enough. Maybe what they're doing, it would actually be overkill if it's just a simple site or a simple blog or something. You could certainly say that potentially my personal site is maybe overkill to talk to Drupal, but I wanted to dog food it. But I think that over time, as people become more familiar with Gatsby and the builds become more complicated, I think that'll start to even out. But I do think there are some things that we can do to make using Drupal and Gatsby together easier. So in the time that we have, just going to look at a couple of examples of little challenges that I faced, specifically through handling images. Kind of encapsulates a handful of things. So I wanted to add images to my Gatsby site, because websites have images. And so the process for me, I looked at the plugins, and the first thing that I ran into was the Gatsby Remark Images plugin. And Remark in that case means it's Markdown, the Markdown library. So it would not apply to the Drupal data that's coming in. So instead found and used the Gatsby Images, Gatsby Image plugin, which allows you to get the same sort of effect. So just to see what, jump out of this, I think. Yeah, just to show what, these image plugins, they'll generate different variations of responsive images for you. And then also it can use different image effects. So like the, if I reload the page here, the little blur up effect that's used on like Medium and Facebook can apply that, or some other effects as well. So nice image handling. So then actually getting the query right took some trial and error on my part. Kind of had to understand where the data is coming from the Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin, understand exactly how those image plugins need to be configured. So here's a look at the post template in this case. And we'll look at the GraphQL query first. So this is for a single post. And so there's the title and body. But then, so the image field in this case is just a default Drupal image field on a post content type. And it's a file reference, so it ends up not alongside title and body in what you get back, but under relationships. So there, the image object is going to have, it would have the URL, for example. So that would give you the URL of the image in your Drupal CMS, but that's not what you want, because on your build, you don't want the image referencing your CMS. You want all of the assets built and available to deploy somewhere. So then this portion is dealing with the processed image from the plugin. So there's the local file that gets generated based on the image file from Drupal. And then you can specify the sizes there. That's for a fluid variation of the responsive image. I think in version 2, that's now called fluid, which makes a little bit more sense. And then that Gatsby image sharp sizes is a query fragment there. And so that took a little trial and error on my part too, in that you can't use that in the GraphQL query UI. So I had to kind of try that out when doing some builds, and took a few times to get it quite right. So this is the render method that makes use of the image. So the relevant portion here, you get the title and a date. And then I check to see if the post has an image, and if it does, I use a styled component, post image, and that just is the Gatsby image component, but with just a little bit of additional styling. And then the sizes portion of the object gets passed into that sizes prop to give you the responsive version of the image. And then for the body, we have our friend dangerously set inner HTML, wonderful name, to just plop out all of the body value from Drupal there. So we end up with a image in our page. So, but this case, it is just one image explicitly placed somewhere in the template, which is great, but especially if we're using Drupal to manage our content, we might want to use the WYSIWYG editor, CK editor, or we might have multiple images. And then also looking at the Gatsby Remark Images plugin, that can handle images anywhere within your markdown content, so certainly more flexible. So I, asked myself, can we handle the flexible image placement with the data that we get from Drupal? And really all I was able to come up with is a bit of a kind of hacky workaround, at the moment anyway. So to achieve this, I'll actually put in the Drupal body content, in this case, placeholder element. So it's probably pretty small there, but it's that post image. That's the component that we're going to end up rendering. So I'll place that where I want it to be placed in the post. Should make this bigger. And so looking back at the post template with some changes here, I'm using React HTML parser, so that is going to, there's a handful of libraries that do this. But that's going to take the body content from Drupal and parse it into the related React elements. But then additionally, the nice thing that does is it'll accept a transform function. So I can look for that placeholder in the markup and actually convert it to the post image component, if it exists, and also pass in the image data that I got from the query in this template. And then down to rendering it, so we have a constant for the post, and then the modified body here is the body value transformed through React HTML parser. And then in the render method, instead of our dangerously set inner HTML, we can just spit out the modified body. I don't necessarily think it is any less dangerous doing it this way, but we don't have to use that prop. So that gives us our image placed where we want it in our post, which is nice since we have the ability to manage and edit our content more flexibly on the Drupal side of things. Doesn't really feel like by any means a long-term solution. I think what would really be useful here is some sort of similar plugin, similar to what Gatsby Remarked Images does, that can handle images that are anywhere in the response we get back from Drupal. Definitely something to look at there. I think it would make the process of handling images a little bit easier. So then another thing that is not really Gatsby specific in any way is deployment. So we have our Gatsby site that we can build, and it's pointing at Drupal, but when we update content in Drupal, nothing is going to happen. We have to manually run our build. So I actually have just an example post here, and took a dumb little selfie of myself, which I will upload. And it's upside down. Hopefully it renders like that. That's great. But I'll save this post and then talk about the deployment process. Yeah, it's going to be upside down. Amazing. Ideally, if I update my content in Drupal, I'd love for a build to be launched, and that's certainly something that can be automated in a variety of ways. I like using Netlify, I actually just wrote a really simple module to handle Netlify's webhooks. So in this case, when I saved the post there with my wonderful upside down image, so this is the current version of the Gatsby site that's on Netlify if the internet wants to cooperate, which it does not look like it does. Amazing. Save that though. All right, well, maybe I won't be able to show that, but am I online? There we go. Weird. Okay, so this is the current version of the site, and hopefully saving that node. Yeah. So it triggered the build hook on Netlify, so I have a staging preview going. It'll take a little while to build, like a minute or so probably. So that's just a simple little thing that I think is nice. There's a lot of different ways to do this. The module is really simple. It's just like an entity update hook. I think there's a handful of things that could be added here, but that's just a nice little thing to streamline the process. So when we update our content in Drupal, we can kick off a build, and none of that has to be done manually, pushed, or anything like that. Just a couple of other things that came up while I was looking into some of these things that thankfully have been recently fixed. But I think this was related to some of the stuff that Matt was doing with Drupal Commerce. But there was an issue where if you have an entity reference that has multiple references, the Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin was only returning the first one. I believe that's been fixed and is in V2. And then another thing that came up recently is with the content module enabled, the contact module enabled, you'd get a 405 response back that was causing Gatsby-Source-Drupal to fail. I think that has also since been fixed, which is nice because that would probably get in the way of a handful of people like trying out Gatsby with Drupal for the first time. So we can actually take a look and see if our build finished. Don't know that it has. No, still going. But yeah, so as I've kind of been working with Gatsby and Drupal and kind of seeing what else is out there and who is using it, you know, I've asked myself, does it make sense for me to use it? Should I continue using it? And I definitely plan on sticking with the plugin because I heart with shiny stars around it Drupal. But I also like, you know, that I don't necessarily have to port around the data for my posts. My Drupal data can live where it lives, and if I have reason to change front ends in the future, it can just stay there. And also, you know, I certainly want to do what I can to try to make Gatsby and Drupal easier for people to use together, and, you know, dogfooding it is the least of what I can do. See if this guy, okay. All right, so the build kicked off here and it's got right side up, what? That's the most amazing magic that we have today. Post with that new content kicked off a build. Got a preview here on Netlify, and then like I can go in and publish it. So it'll be the live production version. And if I go back here, see that? Now I have my right side up image. All right, so that's pretty much it. Time for questions if anybody has any. Short block here. Yes?
What are some of the next things you think, you mentioned, and could you summarize like the next things to update onto the source, Gatsby-Source-Drupal plugin? Like if you had the time, like what would you?
Yeah, I mean I think that image handling that better would be nice. And then beyond that, I mean, one thing that I really haven't pushed a lot is larger builds with more content. So I'm assuming there's probably, although I think as a project, Gatsby is looking to optimize those sorts of things, but there's probably, I would imagine, room for improvement there. I mean, those are really the two things top of mind. And just in general, I think that you know, seeing more examples of people actually using it, digging in a little bit deeper and going beyond just, you know, examples of just a few nodes helps. Yes?
I'm new to React, so is this a good way for me to learn it? Is to build a personal blog on it? Did you find it's a good fit? It's pretty easy. Did Gatsby help the learning of React process, or did it sort of get in the way a little bit?
Yeah, so the question was, did Gatsby help being new to React? So this wasn't my my introduction to React. I had, you know, some experience with React before. I did like another decoupled project that was a web app. Went through some tutorials. I don't know if I would have wanted this to be my starting point, because I'd be trying to understand React and then also trying to understand this static site builder that uses React. And for me, I like that I had some sort of base of React and then had Gatsby to just allow me to continue using React. So yeah, I don't know if it necessarily would have been my ideal entry point. Anything else? Yep.
Did you have build time issues when it was just the normal JSON API endpoints?
So for Gatsby build specifically?
Yeah, I know like when I did the commerce one, I had to put a custom module in that shut down about half the endpoints because it crawls all of the resources and collections that JSON API exposes.
Yeah, so I personally didn't run into that. It could be a situation where I don't have enough content, but I mean, you also could just disable them, right? If you
had JSON API over it, I had to like shut down everything for mine. But we also had in the demo, there's 40 products with 60 variations total, and then all the attributes. I had to like hide all the non-essential endpoints for it to be efficient.
Yep. Yeah, and the plugin itself, I mean, it basically like crawls everything and gets all the data. And talking to Kyle last night, like I think you described it as basically like a little copy of your site that then becomes available. So yeah, that seems like an area that there could be some room for improvement too.
Yeah, like in WordPress, people ran into the same problem, like the Gatsby WordPress plugin. So what kind of people using that have moved towards is making it like whitelist, basically. So you whitelist the browsers that you care about. Because like people have like thousands of comments or something like that, and it just by default pulls those down even though they weren't, didn't really care.
It's good PR.
Yeah, there you go. That's the idea. All right, cool. Yeah, I think I'm up on time anyway, but thanks.